complete biography for each speaker is in your forum program today, so I'll only make a brief introduction. Today's first speaker has been writing about Ohio politics for many years. We didn't give you a number. A lot. And is currently senior editor of the Columbus Dispatch. Please welcome Joe Hallett.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is news director at OSU Public Media and chair of CMC's program committee. Please welcome Mike Thompson. And our moderator for today also follows Ohio's statewide politics. He recently moved from his position at ONN over to WBNS TV. Please welcome Jim Heath.
Thanks.
Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, we'll just give you a quick overview of life in Ohio politics, and then get into more specific items. It's great to be a political reporter in this state this time of year. Last Monday, I was in Lima covering Paul Ryan. Last Tuesday, I was in Dayton interviewing Mitt Romney. Wednesday, I was in Bowling Green covering the president. Thursday, with Beau Biden in Columbus. Saturday, with Paul Ryan in Columbus. Yesterday, Michelle Obama all day in Cincinnati. It gives you a sense of what's at stake here. No Republican has ever won the White House without Ohio's electoral votes, has not been able to reach 270 without Ohio, and no Democrat has been able to do it since John F. Kennedy. So this presidential race, once again, as it was Florida, Florida, Florida in 2000, and as it was Ohio, Ohio, Ohio in 2004, once again, Florida and Ohio are taking their center stage in determining no less than the leader of the free world. I spoke to an education convention just last week, about 250 people, and they were all, just about everybody, complaining about all the negative ads that you see on TV. I tried to flip that around, didn't necessarily work, I'll try it on you, but the flip side is, in 45 other states, they have no ads at all. Those states are already, those states, whoa, wait. I didn't exactly put that in the right connotation there, but you know what I mean? I mean, those states are out of play. They're not going for those votes. They're going for your vote. They're going for your neighbor's vote. Every last one of them, and they're spending a lot of money in an attempt to do it, because I don't believe either one of these candidates can reach 270 without Ohio. All right, here are the latest polls. We'll put this on the table and talk a little bit about it. NBC today, Obama 51 in Ohio, Romney 43. Dispatch, Obama 51, Romney 42. Washington Post, Obama 52, Romney 44. The good news for the Romney camp is that they're virtually tied in Virginia and Florida, which are also battleground states. The bad news is the man from Michigan, Mitt Romney, is struggling. He's having a very difficult time. There are reasons for that. I think one of them on the top of the list, Joe, and I'll turn it to you, but maybe throw this out there, but I think that part of the dynamic and part of the problem here is the narrative of the Romney campaign. I remember covering him before Super Tuesday in Lorain, in a closed-down factory, and there was nothing there. And the whole narrative of Romney was Barack Obama's running Ohio into the ground. Well, remember, Governor Kasich didn't endorse Mitt Romney prior to Super Tuesday, and at some point I think there was communication between Kasich and the Romney camp, because all of a sudden those campaign appearances in shut-down factories stopped. The narrative of our Republican governor is very different than the narrative I think that the Romney campaign expected and had hoped to use at the beginning of the year, and I think that's one of the factors where Ohio has been a much tougher sell for Mitt Romney this year. Joe?
Jim, that's an excellent question for Paul Beck. Paul, why don't you answer it?
No dodging.
Yeah, it is a tougher sell for Mitt Romney because our unemployment rate is just over 6%, while the national unemployment rate's around 8.2%. There has not been a president elected since FDR in 1944, I believe, when the unemployment rate is over 8%. So Mitt Romney should have gone into this election with an advantage. And he did have an advantage. I think it's less so in Ohio because our economy's better. I think that there was a real, if you don't mind me going on a little bit, a real turning point in this election. And that was the whole 47% video. Obama, since May 1, has spent almost $41 million on TV ads in Ohio. That's twice as much as Romney. I mean, you've seen all the third-party group, but Obama spent his money early to embed and enforce this image of Mitt Romney as this Bain Capital rich guy who really doesn't know much about you and for that matter doesn't care about you. That was the message. And with that 47% comment, Romney, I mean, he didn't know he was being videoed, and frankly, I don't think that's what's in his heart, but still, it's out there. He, for voters who had that fear that Obama was trying to implant, that this guy doesn't know about you, he doesn't care about you, when the 47% video came out, it just played right into that, the candidate in his own words. And I really think that's when we saw, particularly it started a little earlier, but the poll slide after that. And I was up in New Philadelphia yesterday interviewing voters, and a number of them brought that up as, one guy in particular said, I had an open mind. I could have gone for Mitt Romney. I had made up my mind, one of the few undecideds. But he said after that comment, he says, I can't vote for him. So that, I think, really did some damage to his candidacy.
It's kind of interesting. Timing. For political animals, we've been following this closely, obviously, all year. But you get post-Labor Day, that's when your remaining undecided and your independent voters really begin to home in and start paying attention. Mother Jones, they released that tape. They knew what they were doing. They knew that the timing was critical on that. Just when independents post-Labor Day were beginning to pay attention, and a lot of independents look at that and think, I don't know whether I'm part of that 47% he's dismissing or not. Mike, kind of an overview of what's happening.
Well, I agree with everything Joe said. I think that, this is really the 2004 election in reverse, I think. You think about what we have. We have, in 2004, October of 2004, when John Kerry was challenging George W. Bush, 55% of the country thought the country was on the wrong track. Right now, it's 53% of the country think we're on the wrong track. You have an incumbent president who is despised by the partisans on the opposite side. I mean, Democrats, far-left Democrats hated George W. Bush. Far-right Republicans really despised Barack Obama. So that base is mobilized. And you have a candidate, a wealthy candidate from Massachusetts who's a bit stiff. And it's the exact opposite of 2004. And it's going to come down to Ohio, as Jim mentioned. And you could even say that some of the tactics are the same as 2004. The Republicans, an unaffiliated group, the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, went after John Kerry's strength, which was his war record. And during, this is right after 9/11, George Bush's strength was the war. They had a candidate who was honored, a decorated veteran, and the Republican side, conservatives, went right after his strength. As Joe mentioned, Barack Obama and the Democrats went right after Mitt Romney's strength, his business career and his background, softening him up all summer long. So when the fall comes, that's no longer a strength, or at least that strength is minimized. That being said, it's certainly not over. John Kerry only lost by 180,000 votes here in Ohio. 90,000 people in Ohio, 91,000 people in Ohio changed their vote. It's President John Kerry. So to say this is over and that Romney does not have a chance, it's premature. But this really is 2004 flip-flopped.
All right, so we're in the Romney War Room. We've got a white magic board behind us. We've got 250 electoral votes. We're 20 short. Ohio continues to be tough. You go into this debate tonight. Are you a centrist Massachusetts Mitt Romney talking to Ohio? Are you a fiery Sean Hannity Mitt Romney tonight that's going for, I mean, what, right? I mean, your options here, this is your big chance. Independents probably are going to watch this one more than anything else left. What do you do, Joe? I mean, what kind of Mitt Romney do we see tonight?
I think you've got to see a presidential Mitt Romney, someone that voters can have confidence in as president. He needs to make this election about the big things. and this debate about the big things, because you could argue that the campaign so far has been about small things, you know, whether it's Bain Capital or this video or this attack ad or that attack ad. We have humongous problems, as you well know, particularly as we head toward the fiscal cliff at the end of the year. And both candidates are reluctant to really talk about what they're going to do, because there are no easy solutions to that. You know, $500 billion in tax cuts, and or to $500 billion in defense cuts, and $500 billion in tax increases. So they can't really talk specifically about that, because they'll just anger somebody in the audience, and you know that's the last thing they want to do. But I think Romney's got to lay out his vision about where he's going to take this country. He's got to explain some things, and I think this is what Obama will continually force him to do. Obama will say, you're going to give $500 trillion worth of tax cuts to the richest Americans. How are you then not going to raise taxes on the middle class? And what are you going to cut elsewise in order to solve this deficit and balance the budget as you promised to do? I think that I don't think there's going to be a lot of gotcha moments. I think it's always a little bit risky to script those, although the Lloyd Benson, you're no John Kennedy moment in that vice presidential debate, I think whenever it was, 88, was a scripted moment. I think that both of these candidates are going to try and speak earnestly, and I think they will try to make it more about the big things than what we've heard so far.
That answer about as clear as Boston Harbor. There you go again. Right? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Well,
we're hearing, Mike, that Romney's been practicing for the last month some of these zingers.
Yeah, I'm with Joe. I don't think the zingers work. I think, you know, they can work. I mean, Lloyd Benson, he delivered that perfectly. Mm-hmm. He probably practiced that over and over again because they knew that Dan Quayle had used that line before, so they were ready for it. I really think, I partially agree with Joe. I think that Romney really has to put meat on the bone tonight. He can't be too specific. He can't say, I'm going to eliminate everyone's mortgage interest deduction. But he might say, you know what, I'm not sure that someone who owns $1 million home needs that mortgage interest deduction. And that would give enough of a specific where, you know, it would defeat some of his criticism that he's not specific. He talks in generalities, and he talks, I'll worry about that after I get elected. And President Obama is equally unspecific about his plans, but he's got 4 years of a record that we can look at. So we can see what he's done. Romney's the blank slate, and it's still blank, and it's getting kind of late. I think he needs to fill in some of the blanks.
And Obama's got to make sure he refutes this narrative out there that I hear all the time. And it's not just from Republicans all the time, that government is the answer. That, you know, they like to call it socialism, whatever you call it. But I think that does stick. And across the board, I think people want government more out of their lives. I think he's got to tackle that head on.
I actually asked Paul Ryan Saturday whether one of the problems with this Republican narrative all year of how bad the economy is, and certainly it's chronic high unemployment, as Joe mentioned, no president since FDR has been reelected with an unemployment rate
that was
this high.
1936, by the way, instead of 44.
Right. I wasn't there. But I asked Paul Ryan, I think one of the problems Republicans have had, particularly with independents now that they kind of weigh how bad this economy is, it's an inflationless bad economy. Remember those bad economies of the past in presidential elections? If you have high inflation, everybody's affected. You go into the grocery store and bread is out of control, the price of bread, the price of milk, everybody feels it. There's a funk, and everybody gets it. And yet this bad economy is sort of, there are segments. It's not kind of universal, and I think that's one of the problems that Republicans are kind of running into here in the closing days. Mike, I want to ask you about Rob Portman, because we might have a disagreement here on this. If Portman had been the choice, and if an Ohioan was on the ticket, whether that could have made it easier for Mitt Romney to make his pitch and seal the deal in the Buckeye State?
It might have, he may not be trailing by 8 points. It might be closer to 5. I really don't think. I think there's a reason why he didn't pick Rob Portman to be his running mate, because they did the polling and they saw that it couldn't help him in Ohio as it possibly could have. I mean, anecdotally, it was funny, the couple of months before the vice presidential nominee was selected, all of a sudden we were getting a lot of offers to have Rob Portman on talk shows, and availability was increasing. I mean, he's always been very available, and you always get a lot of press releases, but we were trying to get him on talk shows, and it wasn't working before, like, say, May. So my guess is that his name recognition in Ohio wasn't as high as it needed to be to secure Ohio for Mitt Romney. As nice a guy and as qualified a senator, and the resume was impeccable, he just wasn't, he hadn't been a senator long enough in Ohio.
I think if the race is anywhere from 5 to 10 points, as the polls are indicating right now in Obama's favor, that Portman couldn't swing it. But I've written this, and for the two people who read my column, they'll understand that Obama won Ohio by cutting into McCain, into the Republican margins across the state, but particularly in the red counties. He's the first Democrat to carry Hamilton County since 1972, the third largest. If you look at those really strong ring counties around Cincinnati, Butler, Warren, Claremont, you look at Delaware, you look at the Medinas around, these fast-growing, prosperous suburban counties, which are very strong Republican. Obama cut into those margins there very much. And I think Rob Portman, if it is a 2, maybe even a 3-point race in Ohio, he could have swung the difference. He would have brought southwestern Ohio back to Romney, for sure, I think. He plays well in central Ohio. If you're looking for a bellwether area of the state, the 20-county Columbus media market is it this time. It's almost always won by Republicans. In fact, if you look at the last 6 presidential races, when we had Ohio elected 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, Obama is the first of the 6 past Democrats to win this media market. He won it by 2.8%. But even more important, he did better. He did 13 points better than the previous 5 Democrats who ran in this media market. So Obama cut into these Republican margins. He didn't really outperform the typical Democratic candidate in the big urban areas, although he did very well in Franklin County. I think that Portman could have really tipped the balance in a very close race. And Mike said, well, people don't know Portman very well. The day after he had been announced as Romney's running mate, he would have been instantly known, universally known in Ohio. I think there would have been an Ohio pride factor where people would say, we have an opportunity to put an Ohioan in the White House. Let's not pass it up. So my feeling is he could have made a couple points difference. And I really think that Romney, I'll probably get some pushback here, made the wrong choice for vice president. He should have picked Rob Portman.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that enthusiasm is something that you can't measure on that. There's no way to put a number on that, but to have an Ohioan this close on that national ticket, I think it's been since the 1940s that an Ohioan is actually as important of a state as we always talk about we are from cycle to cycle. It's been a long time since an Ohioan was on one of the major national party tickets.
Last time was Tom Dewey. John Bricker was on Tom Dewey's ticket. That might have been 1944. And Dewey, Bricker, the governor of Ohio, swung Ohio against FDR. It's the only time FDR lost Ohio, because John Bricker was on the ticket, the governor of Ohio, and they won the state by a percentage point.
And again, I wasn't there. But I think it's fascinating. It goes back to sort of we'll all be together in November, post-election, looking back and trying to figure out the dynamics. I mean, the man from Michigan picking the man from Wisconsin and making the announcement in Wisconsin. Remember, even McCain announced Sarah Palin in Dayton. So that whole process, it seemed like Ohio was bypassed in that whole initial feel, and I think we'll look back and with interest if Ohio goes differently than the Romney direction. Certainly want to bring all of you into the discussion. There's a microphone right here. You can work your way up, take your questions. I do want to go briefly back, Joe, and I'll start with you. The narrative, the Mitt Romney versus John Kasich narrative, just kind of quickly, I mean, how much is that is impacting sort of the, I guess, the Romney narrative of things are really bad and we need to replace President Obama?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a little bit overblown. I don't see it as a Romney versus Kasich thing. Really don't see them campaigning much together, and that could be why. But, Romney, even in this state, can still make the case that, we should be doing better. Things are heading in the right direction, but they're not going there fast enough. And we've had policies that have held the state back. And, there's still a lot of anxiety out there, a lot of angst about the future. Job security, people are worried about that. They're worried about health care. They're worried about their pensions. There's a lot of anxiety that Romney can tap into. I think he can still win this state. He's got to have a really, really strong debate performances, and there could be something pop up that we just haven't envisioned that could swing the race.
Mike, what have you heard in the whole John Kasich?
Well,
I joke that early on.
I alternate. I joke that it's the Obama-Kasich recovery here in Ohio, or the Kasich-Obama recovery, depending on whose my audience is. I think the problem is if you look at the Obama campaign, as goofy as their slogan forward is, it's their only slogan. And if you look at Mitt Romney, he's gone from his signs say, "Believe in America," then it was, "We built this," then it was a stronger middle class, then it was, "Are you better off?" They seem to be flailing. If they had stuck with James Carville's advice and say, "It's the economy, stupid," even in Ohio, he could have, I think if he had stuck to that message, but they seem to be flailing a bit based on the news events, where the president's campaign, I mean, you can't look backwards because it doesn't look good. So his is just look forward, and that, that he's been on message and he hasn't wavered from that. Romney has drifted. When he comes to Ohio now and he speaks about Ohio, he doesn't really talk about the economy that much. It's other issues. It's
China.
Yeah, it's trade, which is another double-edged sword for Mitt Romney, and education and protecting your future. The debt gets a lot of play here in Ohio. He's drifted away from, he doesn't ask the question, are you better off here in Ohio? Because I think it's not great, but people are better off here than they were in January of 2009.
And, and another thing to put on the table here is you look at Romney this year, he had a bitter fight through Super Tuesday. And remember, he only won the state back in March, 38 to 37%. And where Rick Santorum won, all of those red counties of the 88 that went for Rick Santorum, those are the areas now where they've got to excite the base and make sure that they're on board. That's why, maybe on Hannity last night, I don't know if you all watch Fox News, but Hannity had another big expose, and the topic was race rather than jobs and the economy. I actually tweeted Mike last night about the fact that Republicans, at least those inside the Romney camp, want to get this back on the economy stupid rather than these secondary issues with 30 days to go.
Just when we go back to those 6 elections since 1988, there has been only one Republican candidate, and that was W in 04, who has gotten more than 50% of the vote, or even 50% of the vote in this state. If Romney loses again, which means he won't get 50%, I think the Republican Party is really going to have to take a look at itself and ask, are we just too conservative for the rest of the country? Because the demographics are changing on this. And if you look at the polling numbers of whether on women and Latinos, young people, they're not trending in the Republican way. So if they lose this election, I don't know if they will, because the party is so much in control of the right wing, in my opinion. But I think they're going to have some real soul searching if they lose this election.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your comments. I'm Jim Rutledge from the John Bricker Law Firm. Given the importance of Ohio in this election, could you please comment on the impact of Ohio's early voting procedures on the comments you've made?
That is a difference from 2004. In 2004, if you recall, you still had to have an excuse to vote early, and you did so by mail. There wasn't, as far as I remember, no in-person early voting. That changed in 2008. In 2004, George W. Bush won Ohio because of his organization and Karl Rove getting the rural vote out in those southwestern Ohio counties in particular. The Democrats learned that lesson. And so in 2008, they really boosted their organization, and the law changed. So we went to no excuse absentee voting. So you could vote absentee, you could vote early for any reason at all, just you felt like it. You didn't have to be out of the country or unwell or something like that. There was early voting. There was lines around Veterans Memorial in 2008. And the Democrats and Republicans both used the early voting to get their vote out. And you're seeing that again this cycle. The early voting is key, and that's what the past week the Obama campaign has really been pushing. They've been, every speech, here's the date. October 9th is the last day to register. Early voting begins October 2nd, yesterday. They're pushing their base out because there is an enthusiasm gap. I think it's about 10 points in most polls. Republicans, by a 10% margin, are more enthusiastic about this election than Democrats are. So early voting it really is the key, probably, to this election.
And that's the reason why Michelle Obama was in Cincinnati yesterday. She had 6,800 supporters. She encouraged all of them, handed them a card, and it had a map with the street where they could literally leave that convention center yesterday and march right over to the Hamilton County Board of Elections and vote. And we interviewed quite a few people that were doing it. Seems awfully early to me, 30 days in advance. But obviously, as I keep explaining to people, we're one of the 5 critical states. You probably want as much time as possible to get as many people through the process and participating in it.
I think it's a little bit disingenuous for the Democrats to continually holler about voter suppression in this state. I mean, there has been some legislation, you know, the photo ID, which really didn't go anywhere in Ohio and was struck down yesterday in Pennsylvania. But, you know, we have 35 days worth of voting, early voting. This is the first Secretary of State, John Husted, a Republican, who sent nearly 7 million absentee ballot applications out to voters. And he has I think he already received 922,000 back. It's hard to see that people are purposely trying to be closed out. What we have is an Obama campaign lawsuit still pending in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which will determine whether boards of elections can stay open on the weekend before the election. And the Republicans and the Secretary of State don't want that. John Husted says he needs that time to make sure the boards have all their registration rolls and everything up to date for the actual election on Tuesday. The Democrats want, the Obama people want it, only 5 counties. People might think that every state voted on the weekend before, every county voted on the weekend before the last election in 08. Actually, there were only 5. 4 of them were among the biggest, Cuyahoga and Franklin. And 90,000 votes were cast on that weekend. And one of the most important things, the reasons why the Obama campaign wants weekend voting is for Sunday voting for what they call their Pew to Poll program, where literally if you look in inner city Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, you will see buses lined out outside of churches to take folks from church to the polls to vote and then bring them back. So that's why the Obama campaign wants desperately to have weekend voting.
And the howls that Joe talks about, the Democrats complaining about, voter suppression and things like that, they're not just complaining about people not having the right to vote early on weekends. That's an energizer for their base. I mentioned that enthusiasm gap. Well, that enthusiasm gap, there's one exception to that rule, and that's in African-American voters here in Ohio. It's exactly the same enthusiasm among African-American voters in Ohio as it was 4 years ago. I think part of that has to do this constant drumbeat that Democrats are using to say Republicans are trying to suppress your vote, which is a very important issue in the African-American community. And they are using this, the Democrats are, to energize their base, to get them to vote, and to vote early.
Secretary of State Husted, the clock is ticking on him in all of this, obviously. The court did say you should have that weekend before election voting. He's appealing that, but there's no time yet on when that decision is going to be reached. So this is one of those, nationally, they're going to be looking in at us, wondering why we're not solving this problem right up to the last minute. Sir, thank you very much for your question. Mike, let me ask you, Senate race, Sherrod Brown, Josh Mandel, dispatch poll had this one kind of opening up too toward the senator. Just yesterday, Brown got the endorsement of the Ohio CPAs, conservative leaning group, had endorsed Governor Kasich, then candidate Kasich 2 years ago. What's the momentum in this one, Senate race?
Well, I think it's Sherrod Brown's to lose, most likely. It probably has been that way since the get-go. What's kept this race close is the economy, first and foremost, but also the tens of millions of dollars in ads that's come in from outside groups attacking Sherrod Brown, and that's what's kept it close. It'd be interesting to see how there will be some Senate debates, whether they're 2 or 3, I think, around the state. It'd be interesting to see the 2 men on stage. I don't think that helps Josh Mandel. His youthful appearance, I think, really hurts him. I mean, you can tell it hurts him when they have to put his age on the screen on the TV ads.
And he says it.
And I was watching I was watching one of the football games. I think it was the Thursday night game last week. And I said, PolitiFact is going to have a pants on fire rating for this ad because it said Josh Mandel was 34 years old. It was his birthday. He was 35. So it was out and out wrong.
Joe.
Well, I long thought that this race was pinned to the presidential race, and that if Mitt Romney won, Josh Mandel would win, and if Obama won, Sherrod Brown would win. But as I look at the polls and you break them down, you could still see a scenario where Romney could win and Brown could win, I think. I don't think it would be the other way around. I don't think Obama and Mandel could win. I think Mandel definitely needs the pull from the top of the ticket more than Brown does. And I think Mike is right. Josh Mandel talks about his admirable service in the Marine Corps, volunteering for 2 tours in Iraq and so forth. But you see him on TV and you think, he's just a kid. He looks, and I think people just, when they see that, wonder, is he ready to be, a U.S. senator? It's maybe the first time I've ever seen a candidate be harmed by his own youthful appearance.
Particularly when there's so much money. I mean, if you think about the flip side of that, Brown surviving all of this. I remember those ads against him by the Chamber of Commerce starting at Christmas time last year. So there's been an onslaught of negative ads against Sherrod Brown now for pretty much the entire year. And yet these polls show that he's got some kind of shield. Maybe it's the youth of Mandel or whatever it is, but he's still leading. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Liz Hickson, and I saw a tape on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. He kept the 47% tape running, and Mitt Romney said, "We won't bring Ann to the forefront at this time because we don't want people to tire of her." And I wonder why the media did not pick up on this crappy comment he made about his wife.
Mike?
It was reported, but it was totally overshadowed by the 47% comment. There were other things on that tape as well. He talked about Israel and Palestine and Middle East peace process and things like that. And they were mentioned when the tape came out, but the 47% was the key quote in there. But that comment certainly doesn't help Mitt Romney's gender gap problem with women voters.
Well, and my opinion is that she is a real asset. I think she's an extremely likable person and makes a great presentation. She had a home run for her speech at the Republican National Convention. So why they don't want to put her front and center is beyond me.
Yes, sir.
In my opinion, the fiscal cliff, that's really one of the big issues facing this country, has much more to do with the polarization in Congress than it has to do with the office in the White House. Today or this week, there's an article in Time magazine called The Columbus Comeback. It's a one-page article. It's a very nice article about our city, and it talks about the Columbus comeback with 4.2% unemployment, having to do with a Republican governor and a Democratic mayor working together on the city's problems. My question is about your perception about either presidential candidate's ability, if they win, to close that gap and work across the aisle.
Well, there was an article in the New York Times yesterday about how, and it was very heartening, about how behind the scenes both sides are working on this problem. So it gave you a little faith that maybe after the election, the two sides can come together. You know, I'm a guy who's not so far from retirement, and I have a 401k, and this just frankly scares the hell out of me because if they don't reach a deal, you can just see another credit downgrading for the country. You can see the stock market going in a tumble, and people like me who need to preserve capital, you can just see, you know, our values plummeting, and it's all very, very scary. Hopefully these people in Congress understand that this is a product of, in my opinion, gerrymandering. We no longer have competitive elections for Congress in this country, and as a result, we're getting too many hard right, too many hard left ideologues in Congress who don't want to compromise. And I look at a guy like John Boehner, who I've known for a long time, and he's a conservative, no doubt about it. But I also believe that he's a deal maker and a pragmatist, and that when he needs to, he'll step to the table and make a deal. The question is, he's got a caucus full of Jim Jordans, who's in the district right next to him, who is an ideologue, way far to the right, and will those people let him make a deal to avoid this fiscal cliff? That's not to say that Nancy Pelosi doesn't have the same on her left. So I don't know, it concerns me a great deal.
And Joe, you know, this is not new. This is not a new problem. I was congressional press secretary on the Hill for the second Clinton term. Remember what happened in the second Clinton term. Republicans spent a year and a half impeaching Clinton over Monica Lewinsky. So, you know, this division, I really do believe that the president and John Boehner, by their nature, would like to go into a room and close the door and make deals. But these extremes now on both sides, and that's where the money's at, let's be perfectly honest. I mean, you got to push those buttons on either side to raise the money that you need, and you have to worry about a primary challenge if you don't do that. There's a missing middle, but that missing middle has been a problem now for quite some time.
Yeah, I think they solved it. I think they pushed it off to the election just to see who won and see what kind of, you know, is their last bit of leverage. You're even seeing that with the healthcare law. You're seeing states like Ohio wait before they establish their exchanges, or wait to see what they're going to do with Medicaid. They're waiting to see who wins. And if Romney wins, the deal will be more favorable to a Republican side, and if Obama wins, it'll be more favorable to a Democratic side. I really think that, you know, just like the fall of 2008 when they had to pass that bank bailout, they did it because the alternative was just catastrophic. Now, will there be a long-term solution? I don't know.
And I think a critical component of that is if Republicans get the Senate, too. That's the dynamic that we had in the late 1990s, where Republicans literally had Congress and had President Clinton there, and that dynamic became much more partisan because of that complete control on both sides. Professor.
I'm Paul Beck from Ohio State. It's interesting that the rhetoric, at least from the candidates this year, has really been in terms of two different classes, the rich and the middle class. Everybody else who's not rich is middle class. And yet the group I want to ask you about that I think is a really pivotal group this year is the white working class, both here in Ohio and nationwide as well. I can't say that I know any white working class people, or at least not to talk politics with, but the three of you no doubt have interviewed such people. It strikes me that they may not be happy at all, and they never have been happy with Barack Obama, but they may not be happy with Mitt Romney either. And I'd just like to have you comment on that. Romney's going to win the white working class vote, but the question is by what margin? And whether the Obama campaign is going to be able to eat into that margin that the Republicans had in '08 is, I think, a real important question about Ohio and nationwide.
Mike.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's, again, to that 2004 analogy, is that Mitt Romney doesn't energize those folks to want to vote for him. They'll vote against President Obama because they don't like the direction he's taking the country, but he doesn't connect with them. And I think the 47% tape and the other things have really hurt him. I think that's why you hear auto bailout over and over again. That's the key to that section of the working class, mainly white, Northeast Ohio, coming down the Ohio River, Youngstown area, even here to Central Ohio. Obama, quote, saved the auto industry, where Mitt Romney wrote the op-ed that was headlined, "Let Detroit go bankrupt." And again, it's that disconnect that Obama has successfully painted so far that Mitt Romney is not empathetic to the needs of the working class voter. Now, this is where the debates can really turn that around if Mitt Romney can, because he'll have a chance to explain, no, I'm on your side. You know, that was a mistake that I said in that video. I'm really on your side.
Joe.
I was just looking at the numbers from the Ohio newspaper poll, which had Obama up by 5 in Ohio, and yet, and I don't have it broken down by white males, but it's just the opposite. Romney in Ohio is up by 5 with white voters. And I think that my colleague Kathy Kandinsky was over in Eastern Ohio yesterday and interviewed a lot of voters. And particularly, Kathy affirmed this, I hope, particularly among white males, that she wasn't finding any support for Barack Obama. Obviously, the unspoken, little spoken, but sometimes factor could be race. I don't think it's overwhelming, but I think it's there. So I think Mike is correct about the auto bailout, particularly across northern Ohio. It's really, really big. I have been into UAW halls in Toledo, where the workers will just, a Chrysler Jeep will just flat out say, Barack Obama saved my job. And that's very powerful across that region.
And that's why you're saying Mitt Romney go after the coal vote in southeastern Ohio, because that's the white working class vote down there. That's what's most important to them, is the coal industry and regulation and things like that. And that's why you've seen that a lot over again, one of his many themes, but that's why that's there.
Look, that 47% videotape, I think that we'll probably look back and think that was critical, but I think there was an even more critical moment. I spent a week in Tampa covering the Republicans. And if you haven't been to a Republican National Convention, you walk on the floor and you look around, and it's very white, and it's very male, and it's very middle-aged and up. That's the demographic of the Republican National Convention. Nothing wrong with that, but that's what you see when you get to Tampa. A week later, you go to Charlotte, and you walk on the floor of the Democratic National Convention. And what you see is a lot more diverse, a lot more diversity. You have older and younger, you have black, white, but what you're missing in Charlotte is Bubba. You're missing the white businessman. And when Bill Clinton took that stage in Charlotte, all of a sudden the world, Professor, made sense. Because there he is, there's Bubba, and the whole Democratic convention is now swirling around. It's the complete set. It's almost like you're seeing America, the dynamics of America, at that convention. And when Bill Clinton finally made a passionate plea for Barack Obama, and remember, they're not the best of friends. If you talk to Ted Strickland off the record, I mean, the Clinton camp and the Obama camp to this day, there's still a wall there. But when Bill Clinton embraced Barack Obama, I think a lot of the white working class in southern Ohio and southeastern Ohio all of a sudden were like, okay, we get it, that's explained to me, we'll be on board too. And I think that that's helping the president actually, and we're seeing that in the polls. It's kind of bringing independent white men and women on board to the Democratic side and kind of reaffirming that the president is okay. So I think the Clinton speech was actually a pivotal moment. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Shirley Billings, and I have a question on voter suppression. First of all, it seems to me that while the Democrats could be using that as a energizer for voters, the fact that here in Ohio there have been communities in which they have relied upon weekend voting to get out their older people, their church people, and that's mostly African Americans, that it is not an empty argument if those voting times are eliminated. And beyond just that group of people, because it could be other groups who are advantaged by some kind of special arrangement that is made for them to vote. In this day and age, it would seem to me that we should all be on the side of enabling as many people to vote no matter when. And excuses such as whatever, needing time to prepare, we ought to be employing more people to do those jobs if indeed that's the case. Because the priority ought to be getting everybody eligible to the polls.
Yeah, those are the arguments for expanded voting on the weekends, and the arguments that the Obama administration, well, part of the argument they made to the appeals court that was successful, at least initially. My point was that there have been a lot of events after John Husted made his decision on what to do, to have uniform hours across the state before the appeal, and my point is he's not going to change his mind. The rules are the rules pending this court ruling. And to keep having news conferences and demonstrations with petitions and things like that, the purpose of that is to keep the issue first and foremost in people's minds. And that's part of the system. That's what happens. And it is an important issue, a very important issue. But it has a dual purpose as well.
I mean, one of the concerns, I think, is there's no uniform code here across the country. And that's got to be ringing bells in both political parties. You have states like South Carolina as an example where I don't think they have early voting at all. It's still Tuesday. You vote on Tuesday and that's it. And then you have other states like Ohio that are pivotal that are now opening up that window 35 days, which I think a lot of people think is a little outside the box, the other way. So, I think the growing concern is going to be just the varying decisions here by states of how they let their citizens vote. And it's certainly not uniform across the country. Joe?
I was at my high school class reunion last weekend. I won't tell you how many years. It's probably been more than Mike has been alive.
Any FDR voters there?
Yeah, I wasn't there either.
But anyway, a couple of my really close buddies are, more than a couple, are Republicans, and they're pretty hard right Republican. And we started talking about voter ID, and this was before the Pennsylvania ruling came up. They had, these are middle class guys who have had wonderful careers and lived, in the suburbs or in the small. They had no concept of how somebody could not have a photo ID. They did not know how that could possibly be. Yeah. And I just said, you know what? Not everybody is like us. Not everybody is from our circumstances. There are elderly people, there are poor people who don't have cars or driver's licenses and have no idea even how to get a photo ID. So I think your comments are well taken. And, you know, you hope that diversity of America is what makes it so great, but you'd hope that there would be a little more understanding about different circumstances of different people.
We did a story this morning. We found it by accident. They opened up the new Morse Road voting center. Everyone thinks it's great. It's got a huge parking lot. Everything's inside. But our reporter, Tom Borgerding, found 2 people who will now have to take have to transfer buses twice to get there. We hadn't even thought about it before we met those people yesterday. And it makes it harder for those folks to get to that voting location. We're downtown. They get off the bus, they vote, they go home. So it's...
We're right at the end.
Yeah.
15 seconds each. Issue 2, redistricting, does that pass?
No, but it should.
Mike?
I would agree with Joe. I think that had they put John Husted's plan on the ballot, it might have passed. But this one is just too complicated.
You know, the interesting thing is Republicans strongly oppose it. It probably won't pass. But in Ronald Reagan's last interview that he gave before leaving the White House with David Brinkley, Christmas time, 1988, Reagan said the #1 issue he was most concerned about was gerrymandering and redistricting, and said it needed to be addressed so we didn't have the problem. So to my Republican friends, I would just point that out to you, that Reagan thought it was the #1 problem left in the country when he left office. All right, thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. I think we could probably spend another couple hours up here, and I know this. It's great to be Ohio to be a great big sandbox for the broadcast media and the communications media. I suppose Citizens United has kept things rolling a little bit. Thank you for all of this, and we look forward to hearing some more. We'll probably get together in November. Hope you enjoyed today's forum. You can see it again on YouTube, which has a link at the CMC website. Make reservations for next week. What the Numbers Say with David Yost, our auditor, and Ben Morrison, another, and brought to us by GBQ accounting firm. And I want to invite you to continue today's conversation, which you're already doing, out in the lobby. And let's once more thank the Jeffrey Company, Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Hannah News for our program, and our speakers, Joe, Mike, and Jim. Thank you. Thanks for being here. See some of you this evening.